Thomas Blackwood had exactly 3 days to live when he called for his enemy's daughter. The feud between the Blackwood and Sterling families had lasted 2 decades, soaked in blood and betrayal. But as Margaret Sterling stood in his dying room, his final confession would reveal why their fathers really hated each other and why this marriage was the only way to heal a wound that had destroyed two families. The autumn wind carried death across the Montana plains as Margaret Sterling received the letter that would change everything. 20 years of hatred had taught her to fear the Blackwood name, yet curiosity burned stronger than caution as she broke the black wax seal. Miss Sterling, the elegant script began. Thomas Blackwood lies on his deathbed with only days remaining. His final wish is to speak with you before God calls him home. What he must tell you concerns secrets that have poisoned both our families for far too long. Time grows short. To Dr. Samuel Morrison. Margaret's breath caught. Thomas Blackwood, the man her father called the devil himself, was dying. The patriarch who had supposedly murdered her mother and stolen their water rights was finally meeting his maker. But why would he want to see her? She had grown up hearing the story of that terrible night in 1863. Her mother, beautiful Eleanor Sterling, had ridden out to meet Thomas Blackwood at Devil's Creek to negotiate peace. She never came home. They found her body 3 days later, shot through the heart, her horse wandering near Blackwood land. Thomas had claimed innocence, but the evidence was damning. Her mother's locket in his saddlebag, powder burns on his hands. The war that followed consumed both families. Cattle rustled, barns burned, good men buried before their time. The Sterling and Blackwood ranches became armed camps, their children raised on hatred instead of hope. Margaret made her decision as thunder rumbled overhead. She would go to Blackwood Ranch, not out of mercy, but to hear what lies the old devil might tell with his dying breath. The ride took 3 hours through enemy territory. Blackwood Ranch was built like a fortress, with thick stone walls and armed guards who watched her approach with suspicious eyes. A tall, weathered man with silver hair stepped out to meet her. "Miss Sterling," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm Dr. Morrison. Thank you for coming." "I'm here for answers, doctor. Nothing more." Answers are exactly what Mr. Blackwood hopes to provide. But what he has to say will be difficult to hear. Are you prepared? Margaret squared her shoulders. "I've lived with difficult truths my entire life. One more won't break me." The interior was nothing like she expected. Where she had imagined darkness, she found warmth and beauty. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating walls lined with books and paintings. As they climbed the stairs, Margaret noticed photographs of generations of Blackwood families, but one portrait stopped her cold. A woman with dark hair who looked remarkably like your mother, Dr. Morrison said softly. "Eleanor was Thomas's sister-in-law before she married your father. Did you know that?" Margaret's world tilted. "That's impossible." "Would he have told you? Sometimes the truth is the first casualty of war." Thomas Blackwood's bedroom smelled of medicine and approaching death. The man she had been taught to hate was nothing like the monster from her nightmares. Age and illness had left behind a frail old man whose eyes held depths of pain. When he saw her, those eyes filled with tears. "Margaret," he whispered. "Sweet God, you look just like her, just like Eleanor. Don't you dare speak my mother's name? You have no right." Thomas smiled sadly.
"I have every right, child."
"Eleanor was my brother's wife before she was your mother." The words hit like a physical blow. "You're lying." "Eleanor was Eleanor Blackwood before she became Eleanor Sterling. She married my younger brother James when she was 18. They were happy, so very happy. But when James died of cholera in 1862, Eleanor was devastated. She left the ranch, went to Denver to heal her broken heart. That's where she met your father." Margaret's legs felt weak. But the feud, the water rights, the feud started long before Eleanor died. "Child. It began when my father and Robert's father both claimed the same spring during the drought of 1845. Men died over that water. By the time Eleanor came back as Robert's wife, the hatred was already poison deep. Then why did she come to meet you that night? Why did you kill her?" Thomas reached under his pillow with trembling hands and withdrew a yellowed letter. "This arrived 2 days before she died. It's from a lawyer in Denver about James's estate." Margaret took the letter with shaking hands. The legal language was clear. James Blackwood had left Eleanor a considerable fortune in trust, money she had never claimed. She didn't know, Margaret whispered. She didn't know. When she learned about the inheritance, she realized she could use it to help both families end the feud. She came to me because she was torn apart inside. She loved your father, but couldn't bear the thought of benefiting from James's death while our families murdered each other. What happened that night? Thomas was quiet for so long Margaret thought he might have fallen asleep. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Your father knew about James. Eleanor had told him everything before they married. About her first husband, about the Blackwood connection, about the money. He knew all of it. Margaret's world shattered. No, he would have told me. He was afraid people would think he married Eleanor for the money. So he made her promise never to claim the inheritance, never to contact our family again. But she broke that promise. She broke it because she couldn't live with the guilt. Every time one of our men died, she felt responsible. She thought the money could buy peace. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face.
And my father? Did he know she was meeting you?
Thomas nodded slowly. He followed her that night, hid in the rocks above Devil's Creek, and listened to our entire conversation. Heard her confess that she still loved James's memory. He killed her. Not a question. The shot came from where your father was hiding. Eleanor died with my name on her lips, asking me to forgive Robert for what he was about to do. She knew he was there. Margaret sobbed openly, her careful composure shattered. Her father, the man she had worshipped, was her mother's murderer. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Thomas struggled to reach for her hand. Because I'm dying, and I can't take this secret to my grave. Because 20 years of hatred is enough. Because you deserve to know who your mother really was. But there's more, isn't there? You mentioned marriage. Thomas smiled sadly. The inheritance Eleanor never claimed, it's still there, earning interest for 20 years. According to the will, if Eleanor died without claiming it, the money would go to her eldest child. Me. But there's a complication. The only proof that you're Eleanor's heir is in our family Bible, and the word of a witness who was present when Eleanor met with the banker. Who? My son William. He was a boy then, but he heard everything. He's the only person alive who can verify your claim. Margaret's mind spun. And you want me to marry him? I want you to marry him because it's the only way to end this madness. The inheritance is worth more than both our ranches combined. But more than that, if you marry William, the Blackwood and Sterling names become one family. The feud ends forever. And if I refuse, then the hatred continues. Your father will try to kill you when he learns you know the truth. The cycle of violence claims another generation. Margaret sat in silence, processing everything. Her mother's first marriage, her father's betrayal, the hidden inheritance, and now this impossible choice. Where is he? Where is William? Downstairs waiting. He knows about the inheritance, knows about your mother's connection to our family, but he doesn't know about the other things. I've been saving that truth for you to decide whether to share. Margaret stood slowly. I want to meet him. I want to look into his eyes and see if he's worthy of my mother's legacy. And if he is, Margaret turned back to the dying man. Then I suppose we'll see if love can grow from the ashes of hatred, Mr. Blackwood. For my mother's sake, if nothing else. William Blackwood stood at the bottom of the staircase like a man awaiting judgment. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and winter sky eyes. His face was weathered but young, bearing the strong features she had noticed in the family portraits. When he saw her, he straightened and removed his hat. Miss Sterling, he said, his voice low and respectful. I'm William Blackwood. I'm grateful you came. Mr. Blackwood. Your father has told me quite a lot. Now I'm curious to hear your perspective. Perhaps we could speak privately. Margaret led him to a small parlor with tall windows. She chose a chair that put her back to the light while leaving William where she could study his face. Your father claims you witnessed my mother's meeting with the banker in Denver. Tell me about that day. William was quiet for a moment. I was 14. Your mother, Eleanor, she was beautiful, but more than that, she was kind. When she saw me in the lawyer's office, she gave me a book to read, Treasure Island. She waited while I read the first chapter, then asked what I thought. No adult had ever done that before. Despite herself, Margaret felt warmth. It sounded exactly like her mother. What did you hear during the meeting? Everything. The lawyer explained that James had been specific in his will. The money was to go to Eleanor, and after her to any children she might have. But what struck me most was how sad your mother looked. She kept asking if there was any way to refuse the inheritance. The lawyer kept explaining she had to officially accept it before she could dispose of it. Did she mention my father? William hesitated. She said she was married to a good man who was trying to build something meaningful in Montana. She was afraid the money would complicate things, make people think her husband had married her for the wrong reasons. Your father says you're willing to marry me to help me claim this inheritance. Peace, Miss Sterling. Do you know what it's like to grow up where every window has rifle marks, where you can't ride your own land without armed escort? I'd risk marriage to a stranger if it meant ending the killing. Margaret appreciated his honesty. And you think marrying me will solve those problems? I think it gives both our families a chance to start over. But more than that, William paused. I think your mother was right about love being stronger than hate. Maybe we can prove it. Love? We've known each other 20 minutes. Surely you're not suggesting romance? William's cheeks reddened, but his gaze remained steady. I'm suggesting love can grow if both parties are willing to tend it. My parents had an arranged marriage, and they grew to love each other deeply. I've seen it happen. Margaret found herself studying his face, looking for deception. But all she saw was earnestness and weary hope. This man understood the cost of their family's pride in ways no outsider ever could. Your father told me other things, about my mother's death, about who really killed her. William's expression grew grave. He told you about your father. You've known all along. I've suspected for 20 years. I was there that night. I saw your father ride out after your mother. I heard the shot, and I saw him come back alone with blood on his hands and grief that looked more like guilt. Why didn't anyone say anything? Because proving it would have meant civil war in this valley. My father chose to let people believe he was a murderer rather than expose a truth that would have gotten dozens killed. Margaret walked to the window, needing distance. If I marry you, I'll be betraying my father. Will you, or will you be honoring your mother's memory by choosing peace over vengeance? Margaret turned back. And you, can you truly marry the daughter of the man who killed your aunt? William stepped closer. Miss Sterling, I've spent my adult life trying to break the cycle of violence that destroyed our families. If marrying you gives me a chance to turn hatred into healing, then yes, I can put aside the past. I need time to think. Of course, but my father doesn't have much time left. If we're going to do this, it should be soon. Give me until tomorrow evening. As Margaret prepared to leave, William caught her hand gently. There's one more thing. When I was a boy, I used to watch your house through a spyglass. I saw you sometimes, riding or working in your garden. You looked free, happy, despite everything. I used to wonder what it would be like to know someone who could find joy in the middle of hatred. I've been half in love with the idea of you for 15 years. Margaret rode home with her world transformed. When she arrived, her father's horse was tied to the hitching post. Robert Sterling had returned early from Billings, probably drawn by instinct that his world was about to crumble. Margaret, what are you doing out so late? She turned to see Robert striding toward her, concern and fear warring in his expression. I had business to attend to, Papa. What business could take you away all day without telling anyone? I received a letter. Thomas Blackwood is dying. The change was immediate. Color drained from Robert's face. Tell me you didn't go to that place. I went to Blackwood Ranch. Thomas wanted to see me before he died. Robert's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. What did he tell you? The question confirmed her worst fears. He told me about my mother's first marriage, about James Blackwood and the inheritance, about the real reason she went to meet him at Devil's Creek. Robert aged 10 years in an instant. And what else did the old bastard tell you? He told me who really killed her. The words hung between them like a challenge. Robert stared at his daughter and she saw the exact moment he decided deception was no longer possible. She was going to leave me, he said flatly. Your precious mother was going to take her Blackwood money and disappear, leaving me with nothing but shame. Margaret felt slapped. That's not true. She loved you. She loved a dead man. Every night she called out James's name. Every time she looked at me, I could see her comparing me to a memory I could never live up to. So you killed her for it. I killed her because I loved her. Because I couldn't bear to lose her to them. Because I was a fool who thought if she couldn't leave, she'd learn to love me. Margaret staggered backward, horrified by the raw anguish in her father's voice. 20 years. 20 years. 20 years. You let me believe Thomas Blackwood was our enemy. I protected you, I gave you a good life, everything you could want. I loved you like my own blood because you were the best part of Eleanor. You call that love? You murdered my mother and poisoned my heart with hatred for 20 years. That's not love, that's selfishness. Robert reached for her, but she stepped back. Margaret, please. You're all I have left. I'm not your daughter, I'm the daughter of Eleanor Blackwood Sterling, and I won't dishonor her memory by pretending you're anything but her killer. What are you going to do? Margaret straightened. I'm going to do what my mother wanted. I'm going to end this feud. I'm going to claim the inheritance and use it to heal the wounds you've kept open. And how do you propose to do that? By marrying William Blackwood? Robert's face went white. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. William is a good man who spent his life trying to break the cycle of violence you started. The Blackwoods are using you. They want the money. Like you used my mother. The question hit Robert like a blow. He stumbled backward. I never meant, God help me. I never meant for any of this to happen. But you did lose her, Papa. The moment you pulled that trigger, you lost her forever, and now you're going to lose me too. If you marry him, you're dead to me. Margaret looked at the man who had raised her, seeing clearly the fear and weakness that had driven him to murder. I stopped being your daughter the moment I learned what you did. But I'm still Eleanor's daughter, and I'm going to honor her memory by choosing love over hate. She packed her belongings while Robert stood on the porch, watching his world crumble. By moonrise, Margaret Sterling was riding back toward Blackwood Ranch, carrying nothing but her mother's jewelry and determination to build something beautiful from something terrible. Dawn was breaking when Margaret arrived at Blackwood Ranch for the second time. William met her at the door, still in yesterday's clothes and looking like he hadn't slept. Miss Sterling, he said, helping her down. I wasn't sure you'd come back. My answer is yes, Mr. Blackwood. If you'll have me, I'll marry you. William's smile was like sunrise after a long night. Then we'd better tell my father. They found Thomas weaker but still alert. When William told him of Margaret's decision, the old man's eyes filled with tears. Eleanor would be so proud. You're giving both families a chance at redemption. When? Margaret asked. Today, Thomas said firmly. Dr. Morrison can perform the ceremony. We'll need witnesses, but my ranch hands will serve. The ceremony took place in the main parlor, with Thomas propped up in a chair. Margaret wore a simple white dress borrowed from William's sister, with wild flowers in her hair. William had changed into his best suit, dark blue that brought out his eyes. As they stood before Dr. Morrison, Margaret felt the weight of 20 years pressing down. Every person in that room had been touched by the feud. Now they were witnessing something impossible, a Sterling and a Blackwood choosing love over vengeance. When it came time for vows, William spoke first. Margaret, I promise to honor your mother's memory by treating you with respect and kindness. I promise to protect you and provide for you, and to never let our father's sins poison what we might build together. I can't promise to love you immediately, but I promise to keep my heart open to that possibility. Margaret's throat tightened. William, I promise to help you heal the wounds hatred has carved in both families. I promise to be faithful and honest, and to work alongside you to build something better than what came before. I promise to give our marriage every chance to grow into something real. When Dr. Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, William kissed her cheek gently, a gesture of respect that held promise of something deeper. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Margaret had experienced. Instead of hostility, she found herself welcomed into a struggling but determined family. William kept his promise about patience, treating her with courtesy while giving her space to adjust. Slowly, partnership began to deepen into something personal. Margaret caught herself watching William work with the horses, admiring his gentle strength. He seemed fascinated by her quick mind and practical approach to problems. Thomas lingered longer than expected, teaching Margaret about the ranch's history and sharing stories about her mother's time as a Blackwood wife. Eleanor had a gift for bringing people together, he told her. She could see past the surface to what people really needed. You have that same gift. The inheritance paperwork proved complex, but when the money was finally transferred, it was even more than Thomas had indicated, enough to transform both ranches and invest in the valley's future. What do you want to do first? William asked, as they reviewed the documents. Buy out the Peterson mortgage. They're good people who shouldn't lose their land because of debts from our family's war. William nodded approvingly. What else? New breeding stock. Modern equipment. Maybe bring the railroad through. And I want to build a school. These children deserve better education. As they planned together, Margaret realized something had shifted between them. They had become true partners, and when William reached across the desk to take her hand, she didn't pull away. The physical attraction grew gradually, built on respect and shared purpose. Margaret found herself noticing William's laugh, the way sunlight caught his hair, the gentle strength of his hands. She caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race, but he never pushed. The turning point came on an October evening when they were walking back from the corrals. The sunset painted the sky gold and crimson. Margaret, William said suddenly, stopping, I need to tell you something. What is it? I'm falling in love with you. I know that wasn't part of our arrangement, and I don't expect you to feel the same, but I couldn't keep pretending this is still just business for me. Margaret's heart began to race, not with fear but with something deeper. It stopped being just business for me weeks ago. I was just afraid to say so. William's face lit up. Really? Instead of answering, Margaret stepped closer and lifted her face to his. When he kissed her, it was nothing like their polite wedding peck. This kiss spoke of growing love, of desire carefully held in check, of the promise of a future built on more than practical considerations. I love you, Mrs. Blackwood, he whispered. I love you too, Mr. Blackwood, she replied, and realized it was completely true. That night, for the first time since their wedding, the connecting door between their rooms remained open. 5 years later, Margaret Blackwood sat on her porch watching her 3-year-old son chase fireflies. Little Thomas, named for his grandfather who had lived just long enough to hold him, had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. William emerged from the barn, dusty from helping neighbors repair storm damage. The community they had helped build was thriving. The school Margaret had funded was graduating students bound for colleges back east. The railroad brought prosperity to the valley, and former enemies now came to them for mediation instead of reaching for guns. How was the meeting? Margaret asked as William settled beside her. Productive. The territorial governor wants to appoint you to the education board. Our little school has become a model for rural communities. And the Jameson situation? Resolved peacefully. Amazing what prosperity and education can do for people's willingness to talk instead of fight. In the distance, lights twinkled in the windows of Sterling Blackwood, the town that had grown around their railroad station, a name that honored both families while symbolizing their unity. Papa came by today, Margaret said quietly. Robert Sterling had never truly forgiven his daughter, but his grandson's birth had softened his heart enough to allow occasional visits. How is he? Older, lonelier. He asked if Thomas could spend a week with him. What did you tell him? I said yes. Thomas should know his grandfather, even if Robert made terrible choices. Children shouldn't pay for their parents' sins. William kissed her head. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become, the forgiveness you've found, the family you've built. It's everything she dreamed of. Little Thomas came running up, cupping something precious in his hands. Mama, Papa, look. He opened his palms to reveal a firefly, its light pulsing gently. Be gentle, sweetheart, Margaret said, smoothing his hair. Beautiful things are fragile. Like Mama? Thomas asked with innocent wisdom. William chuckled. Your mama is beautiful, but she's not fragile. She's the strongest person I know. Margaret felt tears as she watched her son carefully release the firefly. This child was the living symbol of love triumphant over hatred, of new life growing from old pain. "Tell me the story again," Thomas demanded, settling between his parents. "About how you and Papa met." They had crafted a version that was true but appropriate for young ears, about two lonely people from feuding families who chose love over hatred and lived happily ever after. Well, Margaret began, pulling him onto her lap. Once upon a time there were two families who forgot how to talk to each other. As she told the familiar story, Margaret felt deep contentment. The inheritance had been spent wisely on schools and infrastructure, on building a community where children could grow up without their parents' hatred. But the real treasure hadn't been the money at all. It had been the love that grew between her and William, the family they had created, the peace they had brought to a valley that had known too much war. When Thomas fell asleep, William carried him inside. Margaret remained on the porch, listening to night settle over their land. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its mate, and the sound no longer seemed lonely. William returned and pulled her to her feet. "Happy?" he asked. Margaret looked up at the man who had given her everything she had never dared to dream of. "Completely," she said, and meant it with all her heart. Years later, travelers would hear the story of the Sterling-Blackwood feud and how it ended not with bloodshed, but with a wedding that changed everything. They would see the thriving town that bore both family names, the school that educated children from across the territory, and the ranch that had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose forgiveness over vengeance. Some would say it was the money that made the difference, but those who knew understood the truth. It was love that conquered hatred, patience that overcame pride, and the courage of two people who dared to believe their children deserved better than their father's sins. In the end, the greatest treasure wasn't gold or land or power. It was the simple miracle of two hearts beating as one in a place where love had learned to grow wild and free. If this story of love conquering hatred touched your heart, if you believe that even the deepest wounds can heal when people choose forgiveness over vengeance, then you've found your home at Western Love Stories. Here, in the untamed lands of the American frontier, we bring you tales of hearts that refused to surrender to bitterness, of couples who dared to love across battle lines drawn by their families, and of the simple truth that love is always stronger than hate. Margaret and William's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest courage isn't drawing your gun, it's laying it down. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against an enemy isn't a bullet, it's forgiveness. Subscribe to Western Love Stories for more tales of forbidden romance, second chances, and loves that defied every odd the frontier could throw at them. Because in the Wild West, where survival meant everything, some hearts learned that love meant even more.